Marcus Johnson adjusted his navy blue tie as he walked up the granite steps of First Heritage Bank. The morning sun reflected off the building's glass windows, momentarily blinding him. At 35, he had built Tech Fusion Solutions from his garage into a $50 million company. Today's meeting was supposed to be routine, a business loan to expand his operations into 3 new states. He pushed through the heavy revolving doors, his leather shoes clicking against the polished marble floor. The bank's lobby was quiet, with only a few customers at the teller's windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and oil paintings of past bank presidents lined the walls, all of them white men in dark suits with stern expressions. Marcus approached the information desk where a young woman sat typing at her computer. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. "I have a 10 a.m. appointment with Mr. Miller about a business loan." The receptionist, Betty, glanced up and did a double take. Her smile faltered slightly. "Do you have an appointment card?" Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. The appointment was confirmed by email. "I'm Marcus Johnson, CEO of Tech Fusion Solutions." Betty's fingers moved across her keyboard with obvious hesitation. "Oh, yes, please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Marcus sat in one of the leather chairs, taking out his tablet to review his company's financial documents one last time. He could hear Betty making a phone call in hushed tones, though he couldn't make out the words. After 15 minutes, 5 minutes past his scheduled appointment time, a door opened. Frank Miller, the bank manager, emerged with loan officer Lisa White. Neither was smiling. Miller was a heavy-set man with thinning gray hair and round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. White was tall and thin, with her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mr. Johnson?" Miller's voice carried across the lobby, louder than necessary. "Follow me." Inside Miller's office, Marcus took a seat while White remained standing near the door, clutching her tablet like a shield. The room smelled of old leather and furniture polish. "So," Miller began, not bothering to look at the documents Marcus had sent ahead, "you're here about a loan?" "Yes," Marcus replied calmly. "As detailed in my application, Tech Fusion Solutions is expanding into 3 new markets. We're seeking a $2 million business loan to facilitate this growth. Our company has shown consistent profit increases over the past 5 years, and our credit rating is excellent." Miller leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "And you're the owner of this company?" Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach, but kept his voice steady. "Yes, I founded Tech Fusion Solutions 7 years ago. We currently employ over 100 people and have contracts with several Fortune 500 companies." "I see." Miller exchanged a glance with White. "And how did you acquire this company?" Marcus took out his phone and quietly placed it on the desk, making sure its camera was facing the bank officials. "I built it from the ground up, Mr. Miller. Every contract, every client, every line of code. Our financial statements and business history are all in the documents I submitted." White stepped forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Mr. Johnson, this is a very prestigious institution. Our lending standards are quite strict." "I'm aware of that," Marcus replied. "That's why I chose First Heritage. Our financials exceed your published requirements by a significant margin." Miller shuffled some papers on his desk, not actually reading them. "Well, you see, we have to consider various factors. Character assessments, community standing. My character references are also in the application," Marcus said, "including 3 current clients and 2 board members from other banks." "Yes, well," Miller cleared his throat, "we have to consider whether you'd be a good fit for our institution. We have certain standards to maintain." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his hand tightened slightly on his briefcase. "Could you explain what standards I'm failing to meet? My company's financials are solid, our growth is steady, and our credit history is impeccable." "Mr. Johnson," White cut in, her voice sharp, "I don't think you quite understand the level of sophistication our clients typically possess." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I have 2 degrees from Stanford, including an MBA, and I built a multi-million-dollar tech company. Please, explain what you mean by sophistication." Miller's face reddened. "Now, Seegear, we don't have to justify our decisions. This is a private institution, and we reserve the right to choose our clients." Based on what criteria, exactly? Marcus asked, his phone still recording quietly on the desk. I think we're done here. Miller stood up abruptly. Security will escort you out. Marcus smiled slightly, picking up his phone. That won't be necessary. I can find my way out. But I would like you both to know that this entire conversation has been recorded. White's face paled. That's not legal. Actually, it is. This is a public space, and many states have single-party consent laws for recording. I'm sure your legal team can explain it to you. Marcus stood, straightening his tie. Thank you for your time. A security guard appeared at the door, but Marcus was already walking out. As he passed through the lobby, other customers stared, some whispering behind their hands. Betty, the receptionist, suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. Outside, Marcus stood for a moment in the sunlight, taking deep breaths to calm his anger. He pulled out his phone and called his friend Daniel Thompson, who had been his lawyer since the early days of Tech Fusion. Daniel? Yeah, it went exactly as we expected. No, they didn't even look at the documents. Yes, I got it all on video. He paused, looking back at the bank's impressive facade. Listen, remember that conversation we had about expanding into different industries? I think I just found our next venture. Can you look into First Heritage Bank's current stock price and financial situation? As he walked to his car, Marcus felt his anger being replaced by determination. He had faced discrimination before, had been underestimated and dismissed. Each time, he had turned those obstacles into opportunities. This would be no different. His phone buzzed with a text from Sandra Peters, his financial advisor. Meeting still on for lunch. Got some interesting info about First Heritage you should see. Marcus smiled as he typed his reply. Definitely. I think it's time we looked into buying a bank. He started his car, taking one last look at First Heritage Bank in his rearview mirror. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. Their attempt to humiliate him would become the catalyst for their own transformation. Marcus had learned long ago that the best revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about creation, about building something better from the ashes of prejudice. As he pulled into traffic, Marcus began mentally calculating how long it would take to acquire a controlling interest in First Heritage Bank. Some people learned their lessons through sensitivity training or public shame, but in his experience, nothing taught a lesson quite like having to call the person you discriminated against boss. The day was still young, and Marcus Johnson had work to do. By the time he was finished, First Heritage Bank would never be the same, and neither would the banking industry in their city. Sometimes, the biggest changes started with a single no delivered to the wrong person on the wrong day. Marcus smiled. They really should have looked at his financial documents. Marcus Johnson sat across from Sandra Peters at their usual lunch spot, a quiet bistro away from the business district. The restaurant's soft lighting and private booths made it perfect for confidential conversations. Sandra, his longtime financial advisor, had already spread several documents across their table. First Heritage Bank is in trouble, Sandra said, pushing her glasses up her nose. Their stock has dropped 30% in the last year. They're losing customers to online banks, and their reputation for traditional banking is hurting them with younger clients. Marcus took a sip of his water, studying the financial reports. How bad is it? Bad enough that a takeover is possible. Good enough that it's still worth taking over. Sandra pointed to a graph. They've been hiding their problems well, but their last quarterly report shows the cracks. Their old money clients are dying off, and they're not attracting new ones. Marcus nodded, remembering the empty lobby he'd seen that morning. What's their current market value? Around $100 million, but here's the interesting part. Their stock is undervalued. With the right strategy, you could gain controlling interest for much less than you'd expect. Sandra pulled out another document, and I've identified several major shareholders who might be willing to sell. The waiter brought their lunch, grilled salmon for Sandra, steak for Marcus. They paused their conversation until he left. How much would we need? Marcus asked, cutting into his steak. Sandra did some quick calculations on her tablet. With your current liquid assets and Tech Fusion's backing, we could start buying shares immediately. To gain control, we'd need about 51% of voting shares. Given the current price and market conditions, around $40 million should do it. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's less than I expected. Many shareholders are nervous. The bank's old-fashioned approach is hurting them in the digital age. Some board members are looking to get out before things get worse. Sandra smiled. Their prejudice isn't just costing them customers, it's costing them their future. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel Thompson. Got some interesting news about First Heritage. Can you meet at my office at 3? Daniel's found something, Marcus told Sandra. Want to join the meeting? 2 hours later, they sat in Daniel's law office. The lawyer's desk was covered with papers, and his computer showed multiple tabs of financial research. First Heritage has a weakness we can exploit, Daniel said, pointing to his screen. Their corporate charter has an unusual clause. If someone acquires more than 25% of shares, they can force an emergency board meeting. Sandra leaned forward. That's perfect. We won't even need 51% to start making changes. But we'll need to be careful, Daniel warned. If they realize what's happening, they could try to block the purchase. We need to buy through different channels. Keep it quiet. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. How long will this take? 6 months, maybe less, Sandra replied. We'll need to set up several investment companies to hide the purchases. We'll buy in small amounts, through different brokers. I want to keep running Tech Fusion, Marcus said. I won't let this distract from our core business. Daniel nodded. We can handle most of it. You just need to be ready for the board meeting when the time comes. Marcus turned back to them, a determined look in his eyes. Start the process. But I want something else too. I want you to dig into their lending practices. Get me numbers on loan approvals and rejections, broken down by race and gender. If they did this to me, they've done it to others. Sandra was already typing on her tablet. I'll reach out to my contacts at other banks. There might be a pattern we can use. And I'll start setting up the shell companies for the stock purchases, Daniel added. We'll need at least 5 to avoid suspicion. Marcus sat back down, picking up one of the financial reports. How many current board members are there? 9. Daniel replied. Most of them have been there for decades. Old money, old thinking. Not for much longer, Marcus said quietly. Sandra, start looking for potential replacements. I want people with modern banking experience, tech background if possible, and make sure they understand the value of diversity. Sandra nodded. I know just the people. There's a former Federal Reserve executive who's been pushing for banking reform, and a fintech CEO who's developed some impressive online banking solutions. The next few hours were spent planning the details. They set up a secure communication channel, decided on code names for the operation, and mapped out a timeline. By the time they finished, the sun was setting over the city. As Marcus drove home that evening, he thought about the bank manager's dismissive attitude, the loan officer's thinly veiled prejudice. They thought they were protecting their institution from someone like him. Instead, they had started a chain of events that would transform it completely. His phone rang through the car's speakers. It was his mother. Marcus, I saw your name on a banking document today at work. His mother worked in financial records at another bank. Are you buying First Heritage? Marcus smiled. His mother had always been perceptive. Not exactly, Mom, but remember how you always told me to turn obstacles into opportunities. She was quiet for a moment. They turned you down, didn't they? Because of... Yeah, Marcus said softly. But don't worry. I'm going to fix it. Not just for me, but for everyone they've ever turned away. Just be careful, baby. Those people, they won't like what you're doing. They don't have to like it, Mom. They just have to deal with it. And by the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. After saying goodbye to his mother, Marcus pulled into his driveway. Its house was modest compared to what he could afford. He'd always believed in investing in opportunities rather than luxuries. Tonight, that philosophy would serve him well. Inside, he went straight to his home office and opened his safe. Inside was an envelope containing the first stock certificate he'd ever bought, framed to remind him of where he started. Next to it would soon be shares in First Heritage Bank, lots of them. Marcus sat at his desk and began writing. He believed in planning ahead, and he already knew exactly what he would say at that first board meeting. By the time he finished several hours later, he had outlined not just a speech, but a complete transformation plan for the bank. His phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. First purchase complete. 2% acquired through Jensen Investment Group. They didn't notice. Marcus smiled as he replied, Perfect. Keep going. Slow and steady. He leaned back in his chair, looking at the city lights through his window. Somewhere out there, Frank Miller and Lisa White were probably feeling satisfied with themselves, thinking they had protected their bank from someone like him. They had no idea they had just set in motion their own replacement. The next 6 months would require patience, discretion, and careful planning. But Marcus had built his success on exactly those qualities. First Heritage Bank thought they were rejecting a loan application. Instead, they were about to get a new owner. Marcus closed his laptop and headed to bed. Tomorrow would be another day of running Tech Fusion, acting normal, giving no hint of his plans. But every day would bring him closer to that board meeting, to the moment when he would walk into that bank not as a supplicant, but as its owner. He fell asleep thinking of his mother's words from years ago. When they close a door in your face, don't just knock, build your own door. Better yet, buy the whole house. He was about to buy much more than a house. He was going to buy their whole world. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning at First Heritage Bank. On this crisp autumn day, Marcus Johnson stood before his mirror, adjusting his custom-made suit. Today wasn't just another board meeting. It was the day he would reveal himself as the bank's majority shareholder. His phone lit up with messages from Sandra and Daniel, confirming everything was ready. Over the past months, they had quietly acquired 53% of the bank's shares through various investment companies. Not once had the board suspected their coordinated effort. All documentation is prepared, Daniel's text read. Board members are arriving now. Marcus drove to First Heritage Bank, parking in the visitor's spot one last time. Betty, the same receptionist from 6 months ago, was at her desk. She didn't recognize him at first. Good morning, Marcus said pleasantly. I'm here for the board meeting. Betty looked confused. Sir, the board meeting is for authorized personnel only. I know, Marcus replied, sliding his documentation across her desk. I own 53% of this bank. The color drained from Betty's face as she verified his paperwork. Without a word, she picked up her phone and made a call. Minutes later, Marcus walked into the boardroom. 9 board members sat around a long mahogany table, including CEO Richard Collins and bank manager Frank Miller. Lisa White stood near the back wall, there to take notes. None of them had been told the reason for this emergency meeting. What is the meaning of this? Collins demanded, standing up. You can't be in here. Marcus smiled, placing his briefcase on the table. Actually, I can. I own the majority of First Heritage Bank's shares. This meeting was called according to Section 8 of the corporate charter. The room fell silent. Daniel Thompson entered with Sandra Peters, carrying stacks of documents. Impossible, Miller sputtered. We would have known if someone was buying controlling shares. Would you? Marcus asked, taking his seat at the head of the table. The same way you knew I was a successful CEO when I came in for a loan 6 months ago? Recognition dawned on Miller's face. White dropped her tablet, the clatter echoing in the silent room. As majority shareholder, Marcus continued, I'm exercising my right to restructure the board. Mr. Thompson will distribute the relevant documentation. Daniel began passing out folders while Sandra set up a presentation. You can't do this, Collins protested. This bank has traditions, standards. Yes, let's talk about those standards. Marcus interrupted, nodding to Sandra. She clicked to the first slide, showing loan approval statistics broken down by race and gender. Over the past 5 years, Marcus explained, First Heritage has rejected 89% of loan applications from minority business owners, despite many having superior qualifications to approve non-minority applicants. This pattern of discrimination has exposed the bank to significant legal liability. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Furthermore, Marcus continued, while other banks have modernized, First Heritage has fallen behind. Your mobile banking platform is outdated, your customer service ratings are dropping, and your market share has decreased by 15% in the past year alone. He stood up, walking around the table. Today, we're going to vote on a new direction for First Heritage Bank. The folders in front of you contain my proposed changes, including a complete modernization plan and new anti-discrimination policies. This is outrageous, one board member said. You can't just walk in here and... I can and I am, Marcus cut in firmly. You can either vote to accept these changes, or you can resign. Either way, this bank is going to change. Lisa White stepped forward. Mr. Johnson, when you came in that day, we didn't know. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Marcus replied. You made assumptions. You judged me without looking at the facts. Now, let's see how you like being judged based on actual evidence. He clicked to the next slide, showing more damaging statistics about the bank's discriminatory practices. We have two choices, Marcus announced. We can do this the easy way, with your cooperation, or I can call for individual votes to remove each board member. The press would love that story. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Collins spoke up. What exactly do you want? Marcus returned to his seat. I want this bank to enter the 21st century. I want qualified people to get loans regardless of their race or background. I want modern banking services that serve all our communities. And I want a board that understands these aren't just ethical imperatives, they're good business. He opened his briefcase and pulled out more documents. I've identified several potential new board members with extensive experience in modern banking and digital transformation. They're ready to start immediately. Miller, who had been unusually quiet, finally found his voice. And what happens to current employees? Marcus looked directly at him. Those who can adapt to our new direction will stay. Those who can't will be offered severance packages. And yes, Mr. Miller, that includes you and Ms. White. You'll both have the opportunity to prove you can change. Sandra stepped forward with another stack of papers. We'll need signatures from all board members, either accepting the new direction or tendering their resignations. One by one, the board members reviewed the documents. Some looked angry, others resigned. A few seemed almost relieved. Before you decide, Marcus added, know that I've already spoken with our major shareholders. They support these changes. Fighting this will only delay the inevitable. Collins was the first to sign, accepting the new policies. Others followed. By the end of the hour, Marcus had full control of the board, with only 2 members choosing to resign. Congratulations, Miller said bitterly. You've won. Marcus shook his head. This isn't about winning, Mr. Miller. It's about fixing something that's been broken for a long time. The real work starts now. After the meeting, Marcus stood in the bank lobby, looking at the portraits of past presidents. We'll need to update this wall, he told Sandra. It should reflect all our customers, not just some of them. Sandra smiled. The press will want to talk to you about this. Let them, Marcus replied. It's time people knew that change is possible, even in the most traditional institutions. As he walked out of the bank, Marcus paused on the steps where his journey had begun 6 months ago. His phone buzzed. It was his mother. Is it done? She asked. Yes, Mom, your son owns a bank. And what are you going to do with it? Marcus looked back at the building, now his building. I'm going to make sure no one else has to buy a bank just to get a fair shot at a loan. The sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the bank's facade. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, transforming an old institution into something new. But for now, Marcus allowed himself a moment to appreciate how far he'd come from that morning 6 months ago. The security guard held the door open for him as he left, not knowing he was holding it for the bank's new owner. Soon, everyone would know, and First Heritage Bank would never be the same again. The first month of Marcus Johnson's leadership at First Heritage Bank brought more changes than the institution had seen in its entire history. On a busy Monday morning, Marcus sat in his new office, the same one where Frank Miller had dismissed him months ago. The old leather furniture had been replaced with modern pieces, and the stuffy oil paintings were gone, replaced by artwork from local artists of diverse backgrounds. Karen Martinez, the new branch manager he'd hired, entered with a stack of reports. She had 20 years of banking experience and a reputation for excellence in community outreach. The diversity training sessions are scheduled for all branches, Karen reported, taking a seat. And our new loan evaluation system is ready to launch. It removes names and photos from applications, focusing purely on qualifications. Marcus nodded, reviewing the documents. How are the employees responding? Most are adapting well. Some of the older staff are resistant, but they're coming around, especially since our customer numbers have started increasing. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Johnson, Frank Miller and Lisa White are here for their performance review. Send them in, Marcus replied. Miller and White entered, looking uncomfortable in their new positions. After the takeover, Marcus had given them a choice: adapt to the new policies or leave with severance packages. They had chosen to stay, though they'd been demoted to regular loan officers. Please, sit down, Marcus gestured to the chairs. How are you finding your new roles? Miller cleared his throat. It's different, but educational. Last week, White added quietly, I approved a loan to a Hispanic business owner I might have overlooked before. Her business plan was excellent. Marcus smiled slightly. That's exactly what we want to see. Banking isn't about prejudices, it's about potential. How are you finding the new loan evaluation system? It's more objective, Miller admitted. When you can't see the applicant's face or name, you focus on what matters, their qualifications. The meeting continued with Marcus reviewing their recent work. Both showed improvement, though they still had a long way to go. As they left, Karen returned with more updates. The community outreach program is gaining traction, she reported. We've had 50 small business owners attend our financial literacy workshops this month alone. Marcus picked up a framed photo from his desk. It showed him and his mother at the grand reopening ceremony last week. What about the mobile banking rollout? Downloads are exceeding projections. The younger customers especially love the new app. And our partnership with local tech startups is bringing in new accounts daily. The bank's transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Marcus had implemented fundamental changes in how they operated. The old system of favoritism and prejudice was replaced with clear, objective criteria. Every employee had gone through comprehensive diversity training, and new hiring practices ensured the staff better reflected their community. Later that afternoon, Marcus walked through the bank lobby. The space had been renovated, made more welcoming with comfortable seating areas and a coffee bar. Digital screens displayed information about financial services in multiple languages. A group of young entrepreneurs was using the new meeting space, discussing business plans with a loan officer. His phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Stock price up 15% since the changes. Board members who doubted you are suddenly very quiet. Marcus smiled, remembering the skepticism he'd faced when announcing his plans. But the numbers didn't lie. The bank's performance was improving. By welcoming all customers and embracing modern banking practices, they were growing faster than ever. A young black woman approached him, extending her hand. Mr. Johnson, I'm Ashley Brown. Your new loan program helped me start my catering business. I just wanted to say thank you. Marcus shook her hand warmly. Thank you for choosing First Heritage. How's the business going? Growing fast. The business development workshops you offer have been incredibly helpful. After chatting with Ashley, Marcus met with his social media team. The bank's transformation had gained national attention, and they were carefully managing their public image. Their story had inspired similar changes at other banks, creating a ripple effect across the industry. Our latest campaign focusing on community success stories has gone viral, the social media manager reported. People are sharing their experiences with our new policies. Even our competitors are taking notice. Marcus checked his watch. Time for the weekly all-staff meeting. In the bank's renovated conference room, employees from all departments gathered. The diversity of faces was striking compared to 6 months ago. Good afternoon, everyone, Marcus began. Let's talk about our progress and what's next. He outlined their achievements. Loan approvals were up, customer satisfaction had improved, and their digital services were winning awards. But more importantly, they were making a real difference in people's lives. Remember, he concluded, we're not just running a bank, we're building a better future for our community. Every loan we approve, every business we help start, every family we help buy a home, that's our real measure of success. After the meeting, Marcus found Frank Miller waiting outside his office. Mr. Johnson, Miller said hesitantly, I owe you an apology. What I did that day, I was wrong. Marcus studied him for a moment. Apology accepted. But show me through your actions that you've learned from it. That evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, he paused by Betty's desk. She had improved significantly, greeting all customers with equal respect now. Good night, Betty, he said. Good night, Mr. Johnson, she replied warmly. Oh, and congratulations on the Forbes article. They really captured what you're doing here. Marcus walked to his car, remembering how different things had been just months ago. The bank that had once rejected him was now a model of inclusive banking. But he wasn't done yet. There were still more changes to make, more barriers to break down. His phone rang. It was his mother again. "Just saw another story about the bank on the news," she said proudly. "You're really doing it, baby. You're really changing things." "We are, Mom," he replied, emphasizing the we. "It's not just me, it's everyone who was willing to change, to learn, to grow." As he drove home, Marcus thought about all the people who would never have to go through what he did. Every day, First Heritage Bank was proving that success and inclusion weren't mutually exclusive, they were interdependent. The sun was setting behind the bank building, its windows glowing golden in the evening light. Inside those walls, people were getting chances they never had before. Outside, the old sign still read First Heritage Bank, but now it meant something entirely different. It meant hope. 1 year had passed since Marcus Johnson's takeover of First Heritage Bank. On this bright morning, he stood on the stage of the city's convention center, preparing to give the keynote speech at the National Banking Innovation Conference. The audience was filled with banking executives, financial journalists, and community leaders. "A year ago," Marcus began, "I walked into First Heritage Bank seeking a business loan. I was turned away because of how I looked, not because of my qualifications. Today, I stand before you as the owner of that same bank, and I'm here to share what we've learned about transforming an old institution into a force for positive change." The screens behind him displayed First Heritage's impressive numbers. Customer base up 45%, loan approval rates balanced across all demographics, and profits increased by 30%. But Marcus was most proud of the faces shown next, successful business owners from all backgrounds who had received loans under the new system. In the front row, Frank Miller and Lisa White sat watching. They had become unexpected allies in the bank's transformation, using their experience to help other banking professionals recognize and overcome their biases. Their journey from prejudice to understanding had become a case study in corporate change. "Change isn't just about new policies," Marcus continued. "It's about creating new opportunities. Last month, we helped 50 new businesses get their start. Each of those businesses will create jobs, serve their communities, and build wealth for future generations." After the speech, Marcus met with a group of young bankers who were implementing similar changes at their institutions. They shared stories and strategies, building a network of progressive banking leaders. "Your story inspired me to speak up at my bank," one young banker said. "We've started reviewing our loan practices, and the results are eye-opening." Back at First Heritage, Marcus walked through the transformed bank. The lobby was buzzing with activity. Small business owners chatted with loan officers in the comfortable meeting spaces. Young people used the free financial planning services. Community groups gathered in the education center for workshops. Karen Martinez approached with the latest reports. "We've been rated the most inclusive bank in the region," she said proudly. "And our small business loan program is being studied as a model by the Federal Reserve." Marcus smiled, remembering the empty, unwelcoming space this had been a year ago. Now, the walls displayed artwork from local artists, and signs in multiple languages welcomed everyone. The security guard, who once would have escorted him out, now greeted him warmly. In the loan department, he found a familiar face. Betty, the former receptionist, now a successful loan officer after completing the bank's employee development program. "Mr. Johnson," she called out, "remember Ashley Brown, the caterer? She's expanding to 3 new locations. We just approved her expansion loan." Marcus nodded approvingly. Success stories like Ashley's were becoming common. The bank's new approach wasn't just morally right, it was good business. By looking past prejudices and focusing on potential, they were discovering opportunities their competitors missed. His phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. "Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature story. They're calling First Heritage the future of banking." Later that afternoon, Marcus hosted a community meeting in the bank's new conference center. Local business owners, community leaders, and bank employees gathered to discuss future initiatives. A year ago, Marcus addressed the group. This bank was losing touch with its community. Today, we're part of its heartbeat. But we're not done yet. We're just getting started. He unveiled plans for a new program, a partnership with local schools to teach financial literacy and entrepreneurship. The bank would provide mentoring, seed funding, and practical experience to young people interested in business. Success shouldn't depend on what you look like or where you come from, Marcus explained. It should depend on your ideas, your work ethic, and your determination. Our job is to make sure everyone gets a fair chance to prove themselves. After the meeting, Marcus found a quiet moment in his office. The view from his window showed a city changing, just like his bank. New businesses were opening, communities were growing stronger, and barriers were coming down. His mother's words hung on his wall in elegant calligraphy. When they close a door in your face, build your own door. Below it was the original rejection letter from First Heritage Bank, now a reminder of how far they'd come. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Johnson, the new board members are here for the strategy meeting. In the boardroom, Marcus sat with a diverse group of banking professionals, tech experts, and community leaders. The old portraits of stern-faced bankers had been replaced by a mural showing the city's vibrant communities. Our success this year proves something important, Marcus told them. Inclusion isn't just right, it's profitable. When we open our doors to everyone, we all prosper. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Marcus stood in the bank lobby one last time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to make a difference. But tonight, he could appreciate how a moment of discrimination had led to a movement for change. His phone lit up with a text from his mother. Saw another business owner on TV thanking your bank. You didn't just buy a bank, baby, you built a legacy. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the people who would never have to face the rejection he had faced. First Heritage Bank had become more than just a bank. It was a blueprint for change, a proof that the future belonged to those who embraced everyone's potential. As he walked to his car, Marcus passed the spot where he had stood that first day, angry and determined. Now, that spot was marked by a small plaque that read, "Every door is open to those who dare to change the world." The bank's lights dimmed behind him, but its impact would continue to grow. In boardrooms across the country, people were talking about the bank that dared to be different. In communities everywhere, people were discovering that their dreams didn't have to end at a banker's desk. Marcus Johnson hadn't just bought a bank, he had started a revolution in banking. And this was just the beginning.